between today and the day in which Cindy and I leave for the Philippines, we have 5 Sundays, and we're going to spend all 5 of those Sundays talking about marriage and family. This week and next week talking specifically about marriage, and then talking about child rearing. Mother's Day is a part of those 5 Sundays, so we'll be there also. And I want to say a couple of things related to that, particularly if you're not married or if you don't have any children. I hope that you won't tune me out and say, well, this doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to listen, or worse yet, I'm just not going to come to church for the next 5 Sundays. Because there are a couple of things I want you to consider. First of all, we come to church for more than just a sermon. We come to worship. We come for fellowship. We come for Sunday school. We come to connect with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And so there's more than just the sermon. But then also, that even if you're not married, or if you don't have children, keep in mind that there are things in these sermons that I believe can be applied to other areas of life. They can be applied to relationships with your siblings, or with your parents, or with your friends and co-workers, perhaps. Because there are principles of communication and just general relationship ideas that I think are very important for us to consider. And so take what you can as you listen to this and apply it to the particular areas of your life where it works. We're going to look at Ephesians chapter 5, beginning at verse 22. But first let me ask you, did you hear about the 2 TV antennas that got married? The wedding wasn't so great, but the reception was outstanding. Yeah, buddy. I knew that would get a mixed response. But I bet you'll be telling your friends at lunchtime. Ephesians chapter 5, a classic scripture on marriage, beginning at verse 22. Paul says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church and the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." Well, Paul and Paula Slayton were running around Sapulpa taking care of some errands this week when they had a dental emergency. So they had to interrupt their day and rush to Richard Pitt's office, and they burst through the door, and Paula says to Richard, "I need to have a tooth removed, and I don't want any Novocaine, because we're in a hurry. I just want you to extract the tooth, and we'll be on our way." And Richard was quite impressed. He took a step back and said, "Wow, Paula, you are one courageous woman. Which tooth is it?" And she turns to Paul and says, "Show him your tooth, dear." Well, I got to tell you, that really didn't happen. Paula is much too kind to do that to her poor husband. Although Paul might would have done it to him. Paul, I don't know about that one, but we'll just leave it at that. That's the kind of story I would tell if I was going to write a book called How to Destroy Your Marriage in 30 Days or Less. But I'm not writing a book like that. Instead, I'm preaching a sermon about how to make your marriage last a lifetime, ... happily. And I want to say a couple of things about that title. When you think about going the distance, you generally think about something that is long-term, something that is involved. If somebody runs a 100-yard dash, you don't think about, boy, he really went the distance, because it's over so quickly. Except in my case, it might take 10 minutes, but generally it's something fast. But something that goes the distance is generally something like a project you might be working on, or a job that you work for many years, or certainly a marriage. You go the distance, like a boxer who lasts the entire fight. But this is a subject sermon on marriage. I probably shouldn't use boxing as an analogy. But you get the idea, going the distance. And it also usually involves effort, right? There's usually challenges along the way when you go the distance in something. And certainly that's true of marriage. You're going to have some challenges along the way. If you've been married more than a week, you've probably had some challenges in your marriage. And some difficulties perhaps along the way. The other thing I want to say about the title is that last word, happily. This isn't just about going the distance, but it's about going the distance happily. God wants us to be fulfilled and happy and wants our marriages to be reflections of His relationship to the church. And God doesn't want you married for 20 years and then you saying, well, I've endured 20 years of this stuff. If I make it another 30 or 40 or 50, maybe God will give me a pat on the back and say, way to go, man, you made it through this drudgery, That's not God's plan. He wants you to go through this marriage happily. And so don't settle for anything less. Even if it's going to take extreme work and effort, it's worth it to put the work into it to make your marriage a happy and fulfilling marriage. And so we're not just talking about going the distance, but going the distance happily. Dale Carnegie said that an appalling number of men and women are not really married, they're just undivorced. Now keep in mind that he said that in 1940, when the divorce rate was only 1 in 6. He said there are a lot of people out there undivorced, meaning they're not happy. They're just existing in the same home. They're undivorced, and his implication there is that that's not the way it ought to be. So we're going to talk this morning about how to have a marriage that thrives, how to have a marriage that lasts a lifetime happily. First thing I want to say about that is this, that a marriage that goes the distance begins with commitment. It begins with commitment. Unfortunately, that is something that is sorely lacking in a lot of relationships these days. Because I tell you, if you're not committed to a relationship, if you're not committed to your marriage, there are going to be a lot of times when you wake up and look across the bed and think, I'm stuck with that person, huh? Or sometimes when you're going throughout the day and you might be thinking, I'm not happy, or I married the wrong person, or did I make a mistake? All kinds of, I feel trapped, all kinds of things that might go through your head. But what you have to understand is this, those are momentary times, and a lot of people bail in those times because they're not committed. They haven't cemented their relationship. They've left that door open as an option that, well, if I get where I'm not happy, then I'm out of here. But you need to begin with a commitment. Dennis Miller, the comedian, said, in Hollywood, you can actually have your marriage license printed on an Etch-a-Sketch. I don't know why that tickles me so much. But it didn't work. You just shake it up. And it's so sad, though, isn't it? I mean, that's how a lot of people kind of feel about it. That it's almost so disposable. But I've done a good number of premarital counseling sessions, and I've officiated at a number of weddings, and I'm sure you have been to many weddings yourself. And I have never known any couple planning on getting married who got married with plans to divorce. I never have. I've never had a couple say to me, well, Pastor, we're going to get married, but in 2 or 3 years, or maybe 5 or 6, when the magic wears off, we're going to go ahead and get divorced. We've already got it all planned out. I've never known anybody to say that. I've never had anyone go into marriage with the plan in their mind that after a certain number of years or when certain things start to happen, they're just going to call it quits. Nobody that I've ever known has ever approached it like that. And yet that's so often how it ends in our modern society. I have a cartoon where it shows a couple out under the moonlight in a city park, and he's down on one knee getting ready to propose to his girl. And he has the engagement ring there, and the box is open, and he says to her, will you be my future ex-wife? And when I read that, when I saw that cartoon, it really struck me. Because I thought no one would ever say that. No one would ever say, will you be my future ex-wife? And yet so many times that's how it ends. Nobody goes into it planning that way. In the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, God said that a man is to leave his father and mother and is to cleave to his wife. Now, that word cleave is one that we don't use a great deal in our modern grammar. But I think because of that, we lose sight of really what it means. The word cleave means to adhere to, like a strong bond, like an adhesive, like a strong glue. Think Gorilla Glue or something like that, or super glue. That is a strong bond between two people. And as a result of that, they're connected in a strong manner. And this is why divorce is so painful. And this is why it hurts so much. Because they've been bonded together with the strongest glue that you can imagine. So when there's a divorce, there's a ripping that takes place, a tearing. Not of the flesh, but of the heart and of the emotions. And so when that cleaving gets severed, then you rip. If you glued two pieces of flesh together with the strongest adhesive imaginable and then try to take it apart, you can only imagine how the flesh would rip. Well, that's what happens in the heart when divorce takes place. That's why it hurts so much. But the idea of cleaving together means that two people are bonded together with a strong adhesive that ought not ever be broken. This is where a marriage that lasts a lifetime begins. Because if you mess this part up, then the future is going to be bleak. In other words, if you don't go into it with the mindset of, honey, sweetheart, we know we're going to have hard times. We know it's going to be difficult. There are going to be bumps along the way. There are going to be times when we're not even going to like each other. There are going to be times we're going to look at each other with anger and eyebrows pointed inward. We're just going to feel like running away. But if we're committed, we'll work through it. Even if we have to go through counseling, even if we have to pay some bucks to have people straighten us out, we're going to go through it. And we're going to make it work. And so it starts here. You have to have that mindset. But if you have the mindset of, well, if we hit a rough patch, we just call it quits, then you're sunk. It begins with a commitment. The next piece I want to talk about concerns relating to one another. A marriage that lasts a lifetime, happily, requires loving and cherishing. It requires loving and cherishing. I'm going to try to make this real simple because I don't want to give you, 64 principles to have a happy marriage. Or 141 things to remember this week to make your spouse happy. I don't want to do that. I want to make it very simple. And I want to talk about loving and cherishing. I want to add one more word in a moment. But I want to start with loving and cherishing. In verse 25 of our text, God told us husbands to love our wives as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for it. Then he said husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. No one ever hated his own body, but he feeds it and cares for it just as Christ does the church. And then in verse 33, he says we're to love our wives as ourselves, and the wife is to see that she respects her husband. There's a great deal of loving and cherishing going on in these passages. And I want to talk specifically about what these words mean. Because you might be thinking, well, isn't love enough? Why do I have to throw in cherishing? I mean, love is the greatest, right? That's what Paul said. The greatest of these is love, and that is true. We could say just love your spouse and just be done with it. Just love them. That's good. But here's what I think has happened. I think we've kind of lost sight of what that word love is all about. And so I want to throw in a couple of words that are a little more descriptive in my mind. Not just love, but cherish. You see, here's why I say this. I've heard people say, and you probably have too, I know he loves me, but he just doesn't show it. Or I know she loves me, but I just don't feel it, or I just don't see it. We've probably heard people say that. Maybe you've said it. But you see, I've never heard anyone say this. I know he cherishes me, but he just doesn't show it. I've never heard anyone say that. Do you know why? Because when you cherish somebody, that means to value them, to hold them dear. They're going to know it. Now, it ought to be that way with love, too. But again, I think we kind of lose sight of what love really means. Loving includes cherishing, but I want to throw that word cherishing into the mix, because when you cherish something, people will know it. It's a valuing, it's a holding dear to the heart that is implied in love, but the word cherish to me just adds so much more to it. Think of it like this. You ever see a grandmother hold a grandchild, and they'll hold them up close to them, and they'll say something like, "Oh, I could just eat them up." I don't know why we say that. It just sounds so weird. But that's what I'm talking about. What they mean is, I just love them so much, I just can't get enough of them. That right there is a picture of cherishing. And that's how we're to be with our spouse. That we ought to cherish them, hold them so dear. And see, sometimes when you say love your spouse, people just don't get it. But if I say cherish your spouse, hold them dear to you, value them, maybe that gives a better picture. Because again, I've never heard anybody say, "Oh, I know she cherishes me, but she just doesn't show it." Nobody ever says that. Because if you cherish something, boy, people are going to know it. Josh McDowell was talking to his little girl years ago when she was little, and said, "Do you know I love your mother?" And she said, "Yeah, Dad." And he said, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "Because you tell her." And he said, "Well, what if I lost my voice and I couldn't tell her? How would you know I love her?" And she said, "Because you're always kissing her." And Josh McDowell said, "Well, what if I got chapped lips and I couldn't kiss her? How would you know I love her?" And his daughter Kelly said, "Because of the way you treat her." And see, that's what he was getting at. It's not just telling them, it's not just kissing them, but it's how you treat them. And when you love and cherish your spouse, they'll know that you love them. And I want to throw a third word in here, okay? The word delight. I'm using that as a verb, to delight in your spouse. And I want to make it easy for you to remember, okay? Love, cherish, delight, LCD, all right? Liquid crystal display. Many TVs are LCD, so when you look at your television, think LCD. Love, cherish, delight, all right? This is what you need to do. You need to delight in your spouse. And I think about the word delighting in your spouse. I think about being their biggest fan. I think about being their cheerleader. Does your spouse know that you support them more than anybody else supports them? They ought to. They should know that you have their back more than anybody else has their back. That's delighting in your spouse. That when they come into the room, it makes a difference to you. That it means something. It's not, "Oh, it's her again." That you're glad to see them, that you delight in them. That's what this is about. It's about being a fan. Loving them to a point that you're glad to see them. Maybe you text them during the day, or give them a phone call or an email. Let them know you're thinking about them. Send them a card unexpectedly for no occasion. That's delighting in. Because let me tell you what this does. When you love and cherish and delight in your spouse, all right, LCD, this is what happens. It gives you more room for error, for one thing. Okay, I'm serious. It gives you some wiggle room. And it is a great byproduct, because not only do you breathe life into your spouse, you make them feel like $1,000,000. Because you're cherishing them, you're delighting in them. It builds their self-esteem to know that somebody's crazy about them. But it also gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Here's what I'm talking about. Think of your spouse's heart as a love bank. And every time you cherish your spouse, every time you delight in your spouse, every time you compliment them, ladies, every time you tell your husband he's handsome, or that he's strong, or that you love him, how he protects him, or how he thinks of you, and ladies and guys, every time you tell your wife that she's beautiful, that she means the world to you, that you're so glad she married you, you're putting money in the love bank of her heart. You're making deposits, you see. You're making deposits in that heart. Then, as a result now, when you mess up, you notice I didn't say if you mess up, but when you mess up, which we all will, maybe you forget to give your spouse a message that somebody wanted you to give her, a phone message maybe, or maybe you spill something in the kitchen, you didn't clean it up, you forgot, you mess up. Listen, you've been putting deposits in her heart for days and weeks and months, and she knows that you're crazy about her. Then when you mess up like that, you've got such a deposit, such an account in there that you're having to make a withdrawal, you see. But you got such great deposits in there, it's all right. Because she's thinking, I know he loves me. I know he's crazy about me because he's telling me all the time. He's always doing stuff for me. And so this little irritation is just that, just a little irritation. But look at it the other way. What if you haven't been making deposits in the heart of your wife or husband? What if you haven't been cherishing them? What if you haven't been delighting in them? What if you've hardly been talking to your spouse? What if you've almost been ignoring them? What if you haven't complimented your spouse in weeks or months? Well, then when you forget to give that message, or you spill something and don't clean it up, or you leave your clothes all over the place, then it's like, how can you be so disrespectful to spill this and not even clean it up? Don't you even care about me? Or why didn't you give me that message? Do you know how much this is inconveniencing me? And it's not because either one of you's a nag. It's because you're not feeling the love, you know? There's nothing in the heart. There's nothing in the account. You haven't put any deposits in the love bank, and now you're having to make withdrawals, and you've got no money there. You see, that's the value, and that's the importance. When you love and cherish and delight in your spouse, and you're always pouring into them, and you're doing things for them maybe that they don't even expect, man, you're putting money in their heart. And then on those occasions, you know, when you slip up, you forget something, or you do something stupid, or you say something that's not kind, it's still going to hurt. But you've been pouring into them so much. You've got a lot more leeway, you see. And it's very, very helpful. So I want to encourage you to focus daily on making deposits into your spouse's love bank. Saying things to them, doing things for them, going up, giving them a hug for no reason, giving them a peck on the cheek, whatever, you know, shows them some affection, some thought, doing something for them that they never expected, and you're just building them up. You see, here's the truth, that often spouses have a confidence that comes from them from their spouse. You know, how we feel about ourselves often depends on how we're treated by our spouse. I mean, that's a large part of it. And so if you want your spouse to be a 10, then you need to treat them like a 10. I think feel like this. Guys, you treat your wife like a queen, and she's more likely to treat you like a king. Or ladies, you treat your husband like a prince, then he'll be more likely to treat you like a princess. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, but he doesn't deserve it. Or she doesn't deserve it. Or, if he'll go first, then I'm not making the first move. Listen, you've got to throw those thoughts out the window. You've just got to throw them out the window. You can't stubbornly sit in your chair, just kind of boiling inside, think, well, if he'll make the first move, then I'll follow suit. No, you just got to do it. Listen, I've heard of marriages that have been saved because even though one spouse was treating the other one poorly, the one who was being treated poorly responded by trying to treat her husband or wife better, and it saved the marriage. Turn around and say, man, this person really loves me, and it changed the other person. Now, I can't guarantee that's going to happen, of course. I don't know how the other person is going to respond, but often it changes the other person. So don't sit around saying, well, if he makes the first move or if she makes the first move. Just start building up your spouse and watch what happens. The remainder of this message this morning is going to be a story. It's a story that was written back in the 1960s by a woman named Patricia McGurr. It's actually been made into a short film. And it's told from the perspective of a traveler who went to an island in the Pacific Ocean called Kiniwada. And though there was all the activity and the sights and sounds of the island that meant a lot to him, the thing he remembered most from his venture there was the fact that a man named Johnny Lingo gave 8 cows as a dowry for his wife. And the traveler said, I think about this every time I hear a woman belittle her husband, or every time I hear a husband insult his wife, I think to myself, they need to hear why Johnny Lingo gave 8 cows for his wife. On this island, Kiniwada, Johnny Lingo's name was well known. He was intelligent, he was brave, he was savvy. He knew where all the fish were, and if you wanted to find pearls, he knew just where to take you. And he was a great dealer. That is, he was a great bargainer. You know, if you wanted to make a deal with some people at the marketplace, you wanted Johnny Lingo with you. He could strike you a bargain anytime. So he had a great reputation, but it seemed like every time somebody mentioned his name, they said it with a little bit of a mocking nature to it, or a little chuckle. Well, this visitor to the island, he had been there a couple of days, went up to the manager of the resort where he was staying and said, I need to have a fishing guide. Who would you recommend? And the guy, without hesitation, said, Johnny Lingo is the man you want. Johnny Lingo knows just the best places, and if you go to the marketplace, take Johnny with you, because he'll be able to strike a deal with anybody. But even as he told that, he kind of had a bit of a chuckle to his voice. And there was a guy standing nearby who likewise said, yeah, Johnny Lingo's your guy. If you want a deal, yep, Johnny can strike you up a deal. And this visitor was noticing this, that they spoke so highly of Johnny Lingo, but every time they did, they would kind of have a funny smile or a laugh to their voice. And so the visitor asked about that. He said, y'all speak so highly of him, so why do you laugh? And the manager was kind of hesitant at first, but then he said, well, Johnny was here on our island a few months ago, and during our fall festival, he found him a wife. Sarita was her name. And he paid her father, Sam, 8 cows for her. Well, that's very impressive. Because in those parts, 2 or 3 cows could net you a pretty nice wife. 4 or 5 cows could get you a really nice wife. But 8 cows was unheard of. And so the visitor said, wow, she must have a beauty that takes your breath away. And the manager of the resort smiled. And he said, well, she's not ugly. To say she's plain would be a compliment. In fact, Sarita's father, Sam, figured he'd be stuck with her, that he'd be no way to marry her off. And then he ends up getting 8 cows for her. Isn't that extraordinary? No price that high had ever been paid for a girl's hand in marriage. The visitor said, but you just said she was plain. The manager quickly corrected him and said, no. I didn't say she was plain. I said it would be a compliment to say she was plain. I mean, you should have seen her. She was skinny as a rail. You could see her bones. She walked with sunken shoulders. Her head was always down. She was afraid of her own shadow. Well, I guess there's no accounting for love, the visitor replied. The guy said, no, it's really an odd thing. And you see, that's why everybody laughs, he says, when people mention Johnny's name. Because here he is known as such a savvy dealer, and yet he got snookered. He got taken by his father-in-law, Sam. Well, the visitor thought to himself, I'd really like to meet this Johnny Lingo. So the next day, he went over to the other island where Johnny resided, and he tracked him down and was introduced to him. They sat down and began to talk. And Johnny Lingo says to the visitor, he said, so you've been at Kiniwada, huh? He goes, yeah. He said, do they speak of me there? And the visitor said, oh, yeah. They say you're the best fisherman, the most intelligent, that you're a great deal getter. And yeah, they speak very highly of you, Johnny. My wife is from Kiniwada, he said. Yeah, I know. Do they speak of her? A little. What do they say of her? The visitor didn't expect that question. It kind of caught him off guard. He hemmed and hawed a little bit. He said, well, they do speak of her. Yeah. They say you married her at the fall festival a few months ago. He goes, yeah, I did. Anything more? You could tell by the look on his face, he knew there was something more. So the traveler decided to be honest. He said, yeah, they say that you paid 8 cows for her. And they wonder why. I guess everybody at Kennewanna knows I paid 8 cows for her, Johnny said. Everybody here knows it too. I paid 8 cows for my Sarita. And about that time, his wife came into the room, brought a few snacks, put some flowers on the table. They were introduced. She stopped for a moment, smiled at her husband. And the visitor noticed that she was a picture of beauty. The lift of her shoulders, the tilt of her chin, the sparkle in her eyes, all spoke of confidence and grace. When she left the room, the visitor looked over at Johnny. Johnny was looking at him, and Johnny said, "You admire her?" And the visitor said, "She's gorgeous. But this can't be the same person that they described to me over at Kennewanna." "Oh, there's only one Sarita," Johnny said. "Perhaps